Is Senator Elizabeth Warren now on board with Andrew Yang's UBI proposal? And Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton had words. Has Gabbard gotten more time in the spotlight as a result?
We are back with Roger Fisk, Democratic strategist, and Inez Stepman, senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Lady and gent, all right, so Tulsi Gabbard had looked like she wasn't going to continue making the debate stages. She was falling short in the polls, and it looked like she may be her campaign may be on the way out. Then Hillary Clinton rode to the rescue, gave her some time in the spotlight. Her poll numbers have jumped up, in particular in New Hampshire. She's doing extremely well, as people have loved to see the way that she's sort of tussled with Hillary Clinton. But the question we really wanted to ask you guys, because that's something that we've covered extensely on this show at this point. What we wanted to cover with you all is the fact that Tulsi will be on that debate stage tomorrow night. She probably, more than any other candidate, has been most effective at landing blows against her fellow candidates. I mean, she really came after Kamala in a way that Kamala never recovered from. Who do you think may be in her sights this time around? And, do you think she could be effective making another change in this race?
I mean, she could come out and do something completely outrageous, but I doubt that'll happen. I don't necessarily understand the niche that she's trying to carve out for herself, because the way she's threading the impeachment kind of questions and things like that, I don't completely follow. I can't necessarily say that I get up in the morning and worry or wonder about what she says or does or thinks. So I can't really say that I think of her as much of a factor.
You know New Hampshire well. She's got 6%. She's got 6% in the state of New Hampshire. That's very, very high. I mean, Inez, what I think is, we actually looked at some of the crosstabs. We had what was it, the last time that Morning Consult had a poll, they had a crosstab with people who support Trump and Democratic candidates. Tulsi was actually number one. She had the most amount of crossover support with Trump voters. Andrew Yang, I think, was second, and Bernie Sanders was also up there. I mean, it's just fascinating from that perspective. And I think she really does speak to that, I think, a little bit more of that independent streak in New Hampshire, and maybe, on the margins of the 10% of the Democratic Party who really do like to see people called out. I mean, in this article, actually, in that Times article, it said people close to other campaigns in the DNs of Democratic candidates are scared of Tulsi on the stage because they don't know who she's going to come after next.
I think they're probably right too. She's proved that she can land those blows, as Crystal said. It is really interesting to me. She represents a debate, I think, primarily in foreign policy. And it's interesting to me that the same things are happening to her in the press as are happening to critiques of the last 30 years of foreign policy on the right. Now, I'm like the last neocon. Okay, I'm a hawk foreign policy wise, but it is interesting to me, and I do think it's dangerous that we continue to see, for example, that foreign policy conversation constantly attacked as, oh, you're like a stooge for Russia. You can't possibly believe these. We should have this foreign policy debate on a realistic basis, on a more authentic and upfront basis, where we're not accusing people who have different foreign policy beliefs than the foreign policy establishment for the last 30 to 40 years of somehow being a stooge for Russia or for other adversaries of the United States. We see Tulsi do that, and that's how she ended up landing those blows against Hillary Clinton, right? Yeah. And I think you see that energy both on the left and the right in foreign policy. You see it also in economics. But you see it in foreign policy. People are questioning the post-Cold War consensus, and I don't think that it will go well for anybody up there who tries that tack with Tulsi. I think whoever tries that tack with Tulsi will get a knuckle sandwich, rhetorically speaking.
Well, and Roger, there is a very interesting issue out there right now that has exposed kind of a divide within the Democratic candidates, which is what's going on in Bolivia. And Senator Sanders has come out and called it a coup. Elizabeth Warren had this much more muted response. And to Inez's point, the place where Tulsi really forces the conversation is on these issues of foreign policy. And certainly nothing will get you smeared faster than going against the sort of bipartisan consensus in this town around the military-industrial complex. But how do you think that conversation on Bolivia could play out?
Well, it's interesting. I've been thinking this a little bit, and it wasn't really until Inez captured this as artfully as she just did that it really captured in my own mind. I have to reconcile some of this stuff too, because I grew up criticizing the Reagan foreign policy in Central and South America, et cetera, and now all of a sudden, as we see the U.S. receding from the world stage and we see Russian flags going up over bases in the Middle East, I have to have this conversation with myself, which is like maybe I had more of an appreciation for a muscular, assertive American foreign policy than I was willing to admit, when I was younger. And so your point is excellent, which is this is a critical conversation. People shouldn't be stigmatized. The way I think we're past the point of having necessarily logical, coherent conversations about what's going on in real time in other countries. I think, since basically the Arab Spring, our capacity for misreading what's going on the ground, and maybe it has to do with just how quickly our news cycles go or our inability to have some of these more nuanced conversations. So to what extent Bolivia plays out, I think it's kind of just buried under impeachment and the horse racy kind of stuff.
Which is, to me, unfortunate because I think it's a real opportunity to elucidate what the differences are. Because you do have candidates, and this isn't necessarily like a left, right, moderate, liberal thing. You have candidates on that stage who have different ways that they would approach the role of commander-in-chief. And when you can view it through the lens of something that is unfolding in real time, I think that's a real opportunity.
Yeah, and Zed Jelani's friend of the show, he said it here before. He said, she doesn't actually talk about foreign policy all that much, Senator Warren. And that one of the major, Tulsi was literally cut off by the CNN moderators last time, which is about to go after her, is that when you don't talk about something, it generally gets filled in with the gray. Like the gray area gets filled with whatever the establishment position is. And that Bernie and Tulsi and a few of these other candidates have thought very deeply, have a lot longer record of criticizing the foreign policy establishment, and that contrast is really what could come out in the debate. I think you're right, Roger. Ultimately, I don't think it is going to come out. There's not going to be that much time that's spent on that, but the 10 minutes is well worth it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I hope to see tomorrow night.
Versus something like impeachment where you look at none of them like Trump.
Last
we
time
know
they
that.
spent 15 minutes on
Like,
impeachment.
we're
And they
well
all have
aware.
the same
None of you like-
position.
I would love
It's
to see actually Mayor Pete, we're going to call him Mayor Pete now, Mayor Pete versus Tulsi on foreign policy. Because
went
in
at
the
it a
last
little bit.
debate,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
I would like to see them have that debate.
I'd love to see Biden versus Sanders on foreign policy.
Right.
I'd love to hear Warren actually explain what her view of the world is, because I think we know very, very little at this point. So I'm hoping that some of that does get drawn out in this debate, although I'm not particularly hopeful, to your point, Roger. Another interesting note here. So Andrew Yang, unknown businessman, comes onto the scene touting this sort of, unknown policy of universal basic income, what he calls freedom dividend. And at first he's like completely dismissed. I mean, the media still forgets to put him in graphics. They still, they called him John Yang, right? All of this. Meanwhile, he's inserted this idea into the national conversation in a big way. And one of the latest signs that that is the case is Senator Warren was recently asked in a survey about whether she would support universal basic income. And she sort of switched up her answer set on this and said for the first time that she actually was open to it. Roger, what do you make of that shift?
So, a little bit of combination of answers because, and I'm going back to the Tulsi question. Tulsi doesn't seem to have so you say she's at 6% in New Hampshire. Right. I think that's a little generous, but she doesn't seem to have her people. You know what I mean? You don't sense that there's this really dedicated army behind her. It's more like people that have kind of stumbled on her as a default because they're unhappy with other people. Whereas, and we've touched on this a bunch, and you guys have told me about the analytics that you get from your own show. There's Yang people, right?
Energy.
So if he's at 3 or 4% in Iowa or whatever, those 3 or 4% are going to get up at 4:30 in the morning. They're going to make sure they have a full tank of gas. They're going to they know where they're going, who they're picking up, and they will be there. As opposed to way to the flip side of the numbers. If you're a Biden person and you're waking up the morning of the caucus and maybe you have a flat tire or whatever, or it's raining, maybe you don't go. Right. You figure he's got 10 points or whatever. So he has inserted that. I don't ultimately see that works out as a policy, but he has, I think, the people and the enthusiasm to make his 3 or 4% mean quite a bit.
See, I also read it exactly in the context of Iowa, which is that she's got to know that in these precincts, you have to hit 15% or you don't get counted. You basically get dispersed. You get to go to whatever other candidates. Guess who the second choice for all these Yang supporters is? Bernie Sanders, right? Same with these Tulsi people. These people were polling at 2 or 3%. You're talking about 6% now of people who could go to Bernie in Iowa, and that's plenty enough to put you over the top to number one. So, I mean, this is like in the weeds kind of mechanics, but I really do think that's what it comes down to for Warren. I think the reason that she did that was in order to try and get some of this 2-3% of the people in Iowa who, when they get disbanded in these in these precincts, is to go to Warren. That's how I read it.
I mean, that certainly seems calculated enough for Warren. I do want to go to the UBI question, though.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating that we're having this conversation. It's interesting to me because it was originally a libertarian idea, right? To replace the welfare state with, and I know that Andrew Yang's proposal is not to replace the welfare state, it's just to add his freedom dividend. Interestingly, this may be the first time and last time on this show ever, I will say that I agree with Bernie Sanders. He said that dignity of work matters, right? People don't want to just get a check. Now, if you're struggling, the check might help, right? But long term, people do not. It doesn't solve a lot of problems just to throw out a check every month. And so, but I think that this is an interesting conversation, and I do think it indicates that Yang's traction, that Elizabeth Warren is now picking this up and adding it as a feather to her cap. Of course, her problem is that she has the series of taxes that she's considering raising. She's already spent them many times over in her other proposals, so it's not really
There's
clear.
a lot of feathers in that cap.
It's not really clear where the additional money for UBI will come from on top of all the other proposals that she's made.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that UBI defenders will say, and this is true. I mean, today we do have a culture of workism, right? I mean, I was just looking at the numbers. American workers work more hours per year overwhelmingly than any other country in the world, right? We are obsessed with work. Has not always been that way, that our meaning and center of life was around what we do to earn a paycheck every day. And just focusing on that really devalues the work that that people do in the home, caregiving to their parents, to their children, their neighbors, etc. So we'll save that debate for another day.
Great debate.
Control room is saying that
Went
we have
heavy at the end. Nice, nicely done.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys. The fifth Democratic debate is tomorrow, and it's the first reunion of the candidates since 2 candidates joined. Another 2 bowed out of the race.
We are going to have a live coverage on the ground in Atlanta, the Hills, Julie Manchester, and TYT's Cenk Uygur will have debate previews.
And tomorrow night, we're going to have our live coverage. Our pre-show is going to stream at 8:30 p.m. They're going to be right back after the debate with our takes on the night. Friends of the show, Chuck Rocha, Zed Jelani, they're going to be here with a host of other folks. Do not miss it.
Also, remember to keep sending us questions for Rising Qs. This week, the Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, is going to join us for a very special edition of Rising Qs. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.